May I have your attention?
I'm Greg Inda. Today I sit down with Natanya to discuss the talking strip.
May I have your attention? May I have your attention?
Naughty Natanya, thank you so much for sitting down for an interview.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Let's start at the beginning. Like, how did you get into burlesque?
I grew up in a household where there was a deep love of old movies. Mm-hmm. So I always had an idea, at least of what vaudeville was, and maybe even a little bit of what burlesque was. In 2003, I was working in Chicago as a fine art model. Art schools, artists, photographers. I was doing a little bit of alt runway work. And that introduced me to a bunch of really cool, interesting people doing cool, interesting things, including Frankie Vivid and Michelle Lemore, who at the time were just barely getting started putting together their first shows in Chicago. We had mutual acquaintances who said, well, we know somebody who has an acting degree and she spends like all day, every day naked, so she probably would be cool to work with. Yeah. So I went into audition for them, and they said, how's your dancing? And I said, I'm a pretty good mover, which in actor speak means I can't dance a lick. But they hired me anyways. So simultaneously with that, my best friend from college, who I had moved to Chicago with, and who was the performer who became Ms. Pixie, I knew her under a different name in college. She was working with a theater group called the WNEP Theater. And they were performing in a venue that is now the Playground Theater at the corner of Belmont and Halsted. And another member of that group, who was the performer who became Paris Green, had always wanted to do a burlesque show. And she started developing, with her partner at the time, a burlesque show for this Around Midnight series. And she pulled Pixie in, and Pixie said, well, my roommate is already doing burlesque. So I got pulled in, and that show became the Belmont Burlesque Revue, and then I proceeded to work with those people for the next 14 years. Belmont Burlesque was made up almost exclusively, pretty much for the entirety of its run, with actors. And we all sort of took on burlesque as a role that sort of became a lifestyle. And so I was like, where do I fit in with this crew? And I was like, I'm going to be the classy one. I've sort of been teased, and I tease myself. I'm sort of the Margaret Dumont of Chicago burlesque, you know, with the Marx Brothers kind of like being zany around me and me just having like an unshakable dignity. And at the time, it was partially because I was scared and I was anxious and I was nervous as a performer of burlesque, partially because I was a good mover. And it seemed to me that putting up this very sort of elegant, untouchable, look at me, but I'm not going to look at you, fourth wall completely intact kind of demeanor was going to protect me. Classical music playing, so very fancy lady.
You've always gone by your legal name.
I have. In 2003, 2004, I mean, social media really wasn't a thing. So I think I had a naive idea, but probably an understandably naive idea. I was not a visionary of what it meant to work under my own name on the internet, and specifically to work as a nude model. When I started doing burlesque, I already had a little bit of an internet presence. for whatever.
That big
Right.
slice of that internet, of that 2003 internet pie,
that
right?
sweet, sweet internet pie. So I finally decided after a bunch of permutations, you know what? I'm just gonna perform under my own name. I'm gonna be Naughty Natanya, and we're just gonna do the thing.
Yeah.
The way that your presence on the internet lives now is not at all what it was at the time. So I have a day job. They are actually super supportive of what I do. I've sort of made peace with the fact that anyone who doesn't want to hire me because I'm a burlesque performer and it is glaringly obvious on the internet what I do in my free time is probably not a good match for me. When I joined up with Belmont Burlesque and I started thinking about what kind of soloist do I want to be, I went to the library, because that's where you go.
To the library!
To the library! So I went to the library, and I got a big fat stack of books, and I'm reading through them, and I run across Gypsy Rose Lee, who was at least a familiar name to me because of the musical. But I didn't know a whole lot about her, so I started reading about her. And she was something of a revolutionary in her own time, because at the time, in vaudeville-style burlesque, which is pretty much what there was, there were the striptease artists, and then the only other women in the show were literally called the talking woman. To differentiate her from the striptease artists. And the talking woman was a comedienne, and she would perform the comedy routines, the scripted comedy routines, with the baggy pants comedians. And this was like part of a vaudeville burlesque show. And Gypsy Rose Lee said, the hell with that, I want to talk. And this I remember very vividly as I was reading, because one of the references was to Gypsy Rose Lee's insinuating line of patter. And I was like, that's it. So I went down this research rabbit hole to try and find what she said. And I was like, surely someone wrote it down. I finally found something. And it looked like it was not a full routine. It looked like a portion of a routine because it was pretty short, and I couldn't imagine like that was it.
Yeah.
But it was great, and I thought, well, maybe I will use this like as sort of the kernel of a routine, and I built out an act around it. So I wrote a little prologue. And I wrote it's in rhyming couplets. I wrote my own additional material, and I put in some little funny interjections.
As I slide each cuff back from its place, I'm thinking of the face of Mona Lisa, the mystery of her smile, and what she could be thinking of as I remove one glove. And then the other. And as I slip my shirt back, reveal a patch of shoulder. I'm not thinking of your reaction. I'm not even feeling colder. In fact, it's starting to feel a bit warm in here. Is anyone else starting to feel a bit warm?
Now, the coda to this whole lengthy process that I went through is about, 4 years ago. I had to Google my own act because I was applying for a festival. I needed a link to the video.
Yeah.
So I Googled my own talking strip, and on YouTube, up pops Gypsy Rose Lee performing her famous talking strip in the movie Stage Door Canteen.
Gypsy Rose Lee!
Have you the faintest idea about the private life of an exotic dancer? Well, up until a few years ago, it was New York's second largest industry. Now, a fan dancer's education requires years of concentration. And for the sake of explanation, take a look at me.
And I was like, well, son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Like today, 30 seconds of Googling would have delivered not just the text of the act to me, but the lady herself. Am I glad that I did not see her do it before I put together my own? Yes, I am.
Okay.
I am glad.
Yeah.
Because then I think I would have been very tempted, particularly as a young burlesque performer, as an infant burlesque performer, really, to try and do it as a straight up, almost impersonation.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't have personalized it in the way that I did. I can't regret
Yeah.
the hours with the books, and then the hours to develop the act in the way that it finally sort of came around.
Thinking about it also in terms of being like a monologue piece, right?
Which it is, yeah.
Have you found from when you first started to, say the last time you performed it, did you find new variations in the words, in the way that you approached it?
The text has been the text. I do think my delivery of it has changed a little bit. It used to be more formal, now it's more playful. And I do enjoy, like, there are always, because it is, some of the references are deeply esoteric. They are weird, niche references.
Yeah.
And depending on what show it is, like, I usually get someone coming up to me afterward and being like, that was so goddamn funny. I've tried to push it toward a place where, like, even if you get none of the references, you're still going to get sort of a sense of what the joke is, which I think had to develop a little bit in my delivery.
Yeah.
I don't really do the act anymore. And part of the reason why I don't do the act anymore is I went through, I mean, it is my oldest act.
Yeah.
And I went through several iterations of the costume, but my last iteration no longer fits me.
Yeah.
I've been doing burlesque for 16 years. Is that the math at this point? 14?
Yeah.
14, 16 years?
Yeah.
And I turned 40, I outgrew the costume.
Yeah.
And recostuming it is on my list of things to do.
Yeah.
But I haven't gotten around to it yet because I mean, it was this sort of school marmish, a button down with cuff buttons, and a little sort of tulip skirt. When you look at Gypsy Rose Lee doing it, I mean, she has sort of a magnificent costume.
Yeah.
And I would maybe like, in its next iteration, to have a more magnificent costume.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem being 40 and being in burlesque still. I don't have a problem with my sort of middle-aged body. I like it.
Yeah.
And I still like being a burlesque performer, and I think it's important. It's important to show a range, a diversity of ages, of sizes, of gender expressions, of ethnic identification. I mean, like, those are my values as a producer.
Yeah.
And partially, selfishly, it's because it makes room for me too. My acts are my acts, but maybe I can make some new acts. Maybe 40-year-old naughty Natanya has like new things to say and different things to say. And I can discover those things through building new work and continuing to work with people who I'm excited to work with. It's good. I mean, it's good to have new acts, and it's good to shake things up. And since I am in this like wonderful cauldron of people making work, and I get to see work a lot. I get to see the things that other people are doing, and it's exciting. Just to be able to take advantage of the opportunity to bring new work to the table is something that I should do more of.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm ready to.
Well, no, Natanya, thank you so much for sitting down.
It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful.
It's been such fun. One of my oldest burlesque friends.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, I can't remember when I started with Belmont Burlesque Revue. It was probably,
early.
It was very early.
It was early. I mean, you were like, what, 20?
Yeah, maybe 20 years old.
Maybe
Jeez.
20.
So yeah, like that would be 15 years
Yeah.
ago. So yeah.
So, yeah.
How old am I? So I guess 2 questions.
All right.
Number 1 would be if somebody wants to book you for an act, and then also number 2, if somebody wants to throw a ton of money at you to be an administrator of their show.
To work on their show, yeah.
How do they contact you? How do they reach out?
So either way, it is naughtynatanya@gmail.com. And it's Natanya. Exactly. Yeah, and you can find me around.
You're clearly Googleable.
Yeah, I am highly Googleable.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.